The Abomination of Desolation prophecy given by Yeshua our Messiah did not teach that this prophecy would happen at the end of the world. The Abomination of Desolation prophecy has happened already. Modern religious doctrine tells us that the Abomination of Desolation prophecy is set to occur in the end times, followed immediately by the return of Yeshua our Messiah. But this is not true. The Abomination of Desolation prophecy, along with the destruction of the temple, has already occurred. We should not be looking for this to happen again in the future. End of the world timing of this prophecy does not have its origins in the scriptures, in history, or in prophecy that Yeshua told us to his apostles. The teaching that the Abomination of Desolation event happens at the end of the world was created by early Catholicism. It was taught and promoted by Bishop and later the Catholic saints called Irenaeus and Hippolytus. Let's read 1. The Gospels recounting Yeshua's own words regarding these prophecies. 2. The connected prophetic scriptures. And 3. The historical records to find the truth. 2 different prophecies: the destruction of Jerusalem and the return of the Messiah. Yeshua our Messiah prophesied of his return and the destruction of Jerusalem. Yeshua told his apostles these prophecies during a conversation on the Mount of Olives. This is today called the Olivet Discourse. These prophecies are quoted in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. They begin with the apostles speaking of the beauty of the temple. The Messiah responds showing deep sorrow for the future of the temple and for the city of Jerusalem. He states that not one stone would be left standing upon another, and the city and the temple would be destroyed. Upon hearing the horrific future of Jerusalem, the apostles asked Yeshua 2 questions. 1. When will the destruction of Jerusalem take place? And 2. What will be the sign of Yeshua's return and the end of the world? Notice that these are separate questions and separate time frames. These 2 questions were repeated in 3 epistles. Matthew 24 and 3, same 2 questions. Mark 13 and 4. And Luke 21 and 7. Here's a visual representation of the 2 prophecies, because these are 2 prophecies that would occur at 2 separate time periods. The signs of the return of the Messiah and the end of the world. Here's the end of the world portion. The sign of his coming and the end of the world. Mark 13, 5 and 13. Verse 5. And Yeshua answering them, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and shall deceive many, and hear of wars and rumors of wars, but the end shall not be yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and there shall be earthquakes and famines. These are the beginnings of sorrows. And they shall be hated for my name's sake. But he that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved. Here is a sign of his coming portion and the end of the world. Matthew 24, 27 to 31. For as the lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light. And the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. They shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. His angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of the heaven to the other. So we've reviewed the first part of the Messiah's 2 Olivet Discourse prophecies. 1. The return of the Messiah and the end of the world portion. Let's now review the second part of the Messiah's Olivet Discourse prophecies, which are the destruction of Jerusalem and the Abomination of Desolation.
Did you know there's a chilling prophecy in the Bible that many believe foretold one of history's most devastating events? In Matthew 24:15, Jesus warns, "When you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand." What does this cryptic message mean? And how is it connected to the catastrophic destruction of Jerusalem? Fast forward to 70 AD. The Roman general Titus and his legions lay siege to Jerusalem, leading to horrific destruction. The temple, the heart of Jewish worship, was reduced to ashes. This event not only changed history, but also echoed the ominous warning Jesus gave decades earlier.
Yeshua warned the Israelites of what to look for and to know when the desolation would be near. What Yeshua described was exactly what happened before 70 AD, when Roman General Titus and his army laid a siege against Jerusalem. The city was surrounded and cut off from provisions and foods. Countless Israelites died from starvation far before the Roman army even entered the gates of the city. Let's read Luke 19. It discusses this. Verse 41. And when he, Yeshua, was come near, he beheld the city, Jerusalem, and wept over it. For the days shall come upon thee that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee around, and keep thee in on every side. This happened historically right before 70 AD, before Jerusalem's destruction. Luke 21 and 20. And when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is near. The destruction of Jerusalem is judgment for crucifying Yeshua. Just as the Israelites were judged and punished to wander in the wilderness for 40 years until all but 2 adults died for disobedience, so also was Jerusalem destroyed in 70 AD as judgment and punishment for crucifying the Messiah Yeshua. Let's read in Numbers 14 about the wandering in the wilderness portion. Numbers 14, verse 28. Saith Yah, your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured against me. You shall not come into the land, save Caleb and Joshua. But your little ones, which you said should be a prey, them I will bring in. And your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years, and bear your whoredoms, until your carcasses be wasted. After the number of the days in which you searched out the land, even 40 days, each day for a year. Numbers 32:13. And Yah's anger was kindled against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years, until all the generation that had done evil in the sight of Yah was consumed. For the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness, till all the people that were men of war which came out of Egypt were consumed, because they obeyed not the voice of Yah, and their children, he, Yah, raised up them instead. Joshua 5, verse 6. For the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness, till all the people that were men of war which came out of Egypt were consumed, because they obeyed not the voice of Yah, and their children he, Yah, raised up in their stead. The destruction of Jerusalem was judgment for crucifying Yeshua. The destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD happened for the same reason that the temple was destroyed in 587 BC by the Babylonian Empire. It was destroyed because of the Israelites' extreme disobedience to the Most High God Yah. In 70 AD, however, the Israelites' level of disobedience was unspeakable. It was nearly 40 years before 70 AD that the Israelites actually killed the Messiah Yeshua. Because of such a horrendous sin, Jerusalem had to be severely punished. Let's review the actions and warnings that preceded the 70 AD destruction of Jerusalem stone by stone. Let's read part of the account. Luke 23 and verse 20. Pilate, therefore, willing to release Yeshua, spake again unto them, But they, the Israelites, cried, saying, "Crucify him, crucify him." Yahshua warned them of the results of this evil deed. He told them to weep not for him, but for themselves. Verse 23. Voices of them and their chief priests prevailed, and there followed him a great company of people and of women, which also bewailed and lamented him. But Yeshua, turning unto them, said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming, in which they shall say, Blessed are the barren." Judgment would surely come to that generation. The Israelites with their own mouths cursed themselves and their children, calling for the Messiah's blood to be on them and their children. Matthew 27 and 24. When Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, he took water, washed his hands, and before the multitude, saying, "I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See you to it." Then answered all the people and said, "His blood be on us and our children." Wow. Yeshua prophesied many times about the judgment coming to the generation that crucified him. In the book of Luke, Yeshua spoke of the desolation, the abomination of desolation, being part of the days of vengeance for killing him. Luke 21 and 20. The desolation thereof is near, for these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. The destruction of Jerusalem was judgment for crucifying Yeshua. Here are 3 verses that are interconnected to the Messiah's crucifixion, that being Luke 21 and 22, and Psalms 22, and John 19. Let's read. In Luke 21 and 22, it speaks of the days of vengeance, and it also speaks that all things which are written may be fulfilled. And Luke 21 and 22 is directly referencing the prophecy of Psalms 22 that prophesies Yeshua's crucifixion. Let's read. Psalms 22 and 16. They pierced my hands and my feet. They part my garments among them, and cast lots upon my vesture. John 19 and 23 shows that even the soldiers knew of the prophecies of Yeshua's crucifixion. That starts at John 19 and 23, and it directly also references Psalms 22. And it states, "Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Yeshua, took his garments and made 4 parts, to every soldier a part. Now the coat was without seam. They said, Let us not rend it, the coat, but cast lots for it, that the scripture might be fulfilled. They parted my raiment amongst them, my vesture did cast lots." And as you see, these verses are directly connected to Yeshua's crucifixion. The destruction of Jerusalem. Yeshua prophesied many times about the judgment of the generation that crucified him. Luke 17 and 25. But first must he, Yeshua, suffer many things and be rejected of this generation. Luke 11 and 44. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Also you lawyers, for you build the sepulchres of the prophets, and your fathers killed them. The blood of the prophets may be required of this generation. From the blood of Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, it shall be required of this generation. Judgment was required of that generation that killed him and their children, just as they stated themselves in Matthew 27 and 5, when they stated, "His blood be on us and our children." Destruction of Jerusalem and the Abomination of Desolation occurred in 70 AD as judgment for crucifying Yeshua the Messiah. Let's read more of the prophecies of the 70 AD destruction of Jerusalem judgment that fell upon the generation that crucified him. Luke 21 and 23. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them which give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land, and a wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. The destruction of Jerusalem. Let's compare the prophecies of the 70 AD destruction of Jerusalem to the historical record. The historical record. After Jerusalem's defeat and the complete burning of the temple, the Roman army toppled all the stones of the temple grounds in order to retrieve the great amounts of gold adorning the temple that were melted between the stones during the massive fires. How much gold? Let's read. Flavius Josephus was the author of the book War on the Jews, Book 5, Chapter 5, which includes the description of the temple. Section 3. Now 9 of these gates were on every side covered over with gold and silver. As to the holy house itself, its front was covered with gold all over, that gate all over covered with gold, its whole wall about it. Now the outward face of the temple, which was likely to surprise men's minds, covered all over with plates of gold of great weight. Let's compare that historical record with the prophecy of the destruction in Luke 19 and 44. And shall lay thee, Jerusalem's temple, even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because you knew not the time of your visitation, or the time of the judgment. Yeshua warned the Israelites that were truly Yah-fearing and had no part in his crucifixion, but greatly wept for him. Luke 23 and 27, a great company of people and of women which bewailed and lamented him, Yeshua, to those souls Yeshua told to be aware and quickly leave the city at the time. Mark 13, 14 through 18. But when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not, then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains, and let him that is on the housetop not go down into the house, and let him that is in the field not turn back again for to take up his garment. But woe to them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days, and pray that your flight be not in the winter. In this continuation of Yeshua's warning, he tells those righteous Israelites of the upcoming terror and affliction, not the fear of affliction that Christian doctrine teaches, where the righteous are saved, but the actual affliction that did occur. Yeshua warned those righteous to flee in order not to receive the reward of the unrighteous. Let's read. Mark 13, 19 through 20. For in those days shall be affliction, not fear of affliction, but actual affliction, such as was not from the beginning of the creation which Yah created until this time, neither shall be. And except that Yah has shortened those days, no flesh should be saved, but for the elect's sake, whom he has chosen, he has shortened the days. Evil leadership continues after the Messiah's crucifixion. Yeshua foretold of how that generation of Israelite leaders would not repent, but would continue with much evil to cause the death and destruction of Yah's people and the holy city, even when he was long gone from among them. Luke 23 and 31. For if they do these things in a green tree, crucifying the Messiah, the green living tree, what shall be done in the dry when the Messiah is not with them, long gone, dry tree? The historical records show the murderous level of evil shown by the Israelite leaders right before the destruction of Jerusalem. Almost 40 years after the Messiah's crucifixion, the city of Jerusalem was overtaken by 3 main Israelite internal armies that constantly slaughtered each other, as well as innocent Israelites. They fought and killed each other while the Roman army was outside the wall desiring to attack. These murderous leaders were responsible for burning much of the city and even inside the temple. They even burned, on purpose, the food stores of the city's inhabitants, which led to the horrible famine and massive deaths amongst the Hebrews in the city. Let's review the historical records. Even before Roman General Titus arrived in Jerusalem, the evil Israelite leaders murdered their fellow Hebrews in the temple. The 3 Israelite leaders ran Jerusalem like 3 sets of gangs, and the non-affiliated Israelites were caught in the middle. The ancient Israelite historian Flavius Josephus, Wars of the Jews, Book 5, Chapter 1, Section 4. And now there were 3 treacherous factions in the city, Eleazar, John, Simon. When therefore John was assaulted on both sides by Eleazar and Simon, fellow Jews, he set on fire those houses that were full of corn and other provisions. The same thing was done by Simon. He attacked the city also, as if they had on purpose done it to serve the Romans, by destroying what the city had laid up against the siege. It so came to pass that all the places that were about the temple were burnt down, and that almost all of the corn that was burnt, which would have been sufficient for a siege of many years, so they were taken by the means of the famine. The leaders of the 3 murderous Israelite armies are reduced to 2 leaders and to 2 armies. This is found in the Histories by the ancient historian Tacitus, written in 109 AD, Book 5. There were 3 generals and as many armies. Simon held the outer and larger circuit of the walls. John occupied the middle city. Eleazar had fortified the temple. John and Simon were strong in numbers and equipment, Eleazar in position. John sent some emissaries who, under the pretense of sacrificing, slaughtered Eleazar and his partisans and gained possession of the temple. The city was thus divided between 2 factions. The foreknowledge of the impending judgment of Jerusalem. Even after Yeshua's death, Yah sent more warnings to the righteous among the Israelites of the soon coming destruction of the city. Yeshua foretold the forthcoming death and destruction in Jerusalem and warned the righteous to flee, which we've previously read. Yah also sent spiritual warnings to the Israelites even years and months before the destruction began. Ancient historians documented the physical miracles that pointed to these spiritual warnings. Let's review 6 of the many historical records. Foreknowledge of the impending judgment. The Wars of the Jews by Flavius Josephus, Book 6, Chapter 5, Section 3. Thus were the miserable people persuaded by these deceivers, Eleazar, John, and Simon, while they did not give credit to the signs that were so evident and did so plainly foretell their future desolation. Thus there was a star resembling a sword, which stood over the city, and a comet that continued a whole year. Thus also before the commotions which preceded the war, when the people were come in great crowds to the feast of unleavened bread, at the 9th hour of the night, so great a light shone about the altar and the holy house that it appeared to be bright daytime, which lasted an half hour. This light seemed to be a good sign to the unskillful, but it was so interpreted by the sacred scribes. Section 3. At the same time also a heifer, as she was led by the high priest to be sacrificed, brought forth a lamb in the middle of the temple. Moreover, the eastern gate and of the inner court, temple, brass, and vastly heavy, with difficulty shut by 20 men, bolts fastened very deep into the firm floor, made of one entire stone, was seen to be opened of its own accord. But the men of learning understood it, that the security of their holy house was dissolved of its own accord, and that the gate was open for the advantage of their enemies, and declared that the signal foreshadowed the desolation that was coming upon them. Besides these, a few days after that feast, before the sun's setting, chariots and troops of soldiers were seen among the clouds surrounding the cities. Section 3 continued. But what is still more terrible, there was one, a husbandman, who 4 years before the war began, when the city was in very great peace and prosperity, came to that feast, and began on a sudden to cry aloud, a voice from the 4 winds, a voice against Jerusalem, and the holy house, a voice against the whole people. This was his cry, by day and by night. And they took up this man and gave him a great number of severe stripes, but still went on with the same words. They brought him to the Roman procurator, and was whipped till his bones were laid bare. At every stroke of the whip, woe, woe to Jerusalem. Now during all the time that passed before the war began, this man every day uttered these lamentable words as if it were his premeditated vow. Woe, woe to Jerusalem! This cry of his was the loudest at festivals, without growing hoarse or being tired therewith, until the siege. Continued foreknowledge of the impending judgment. Eusebius of Caesarea, in 340 A.D., called the Church History, L2, C5, Book 3, Chapter 5. For the Jews, after the ascension of our Savior, in addition to their crime against him, had been devising as many plots as they could against his apostles. But the people of the church in Jerusalem had been commanded by a revelation before the war to leave the city and to dwell in a certain town called Pella. And when those that believed in Yeshua had come thither from Jerusalem, then the whole land of Judea was entirely destitute of holy men. The judgment of God at length overtook those who had committed such outrages against the Messiah and his apostles, and totally destroyed that generation of impious men. And how at the last the abomination of desolation, proclaimed by the prophets, stood in the very temple of God. Its total and final destruction by fire. They had inflicted suffering upon the Savior, that in those days, shut up as a prison, they should meet with destruction at the hands of divine justice. Connecting the prophecies of Yeshua and Daniel and the abomination of desolation. Yeshua's prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem and the abomination of desolation points directly back to Daniel's prophecy of the abomination of desolation. Let's review the scriptural and historical context of Daniel and these prophecies. These are an account of the last four empires. Yeshua lived in the Roman Empire, the fourth empire. When Yeshua spoke of what was to come, he referenced the prophecy of Daniel. Daniel was a prophet that lived during both the Babylonian and the Medo-Persian empires, which were the first and second empires. Daniel prophesied what was to happen in the third empire, the Grecian Empire. It was during the Grecian Empire that King Antiochus Epiphanes entered into the Holy Temple and committed the abominable act of desecration known as the Abomination of Desolation. Let's read Daniel's prophecy. There are three parts of Daniel's prophecy of the Abomination of Desolation. Each of these three parts of the prophecy happened to Jerusalem in both the Grecian Empire and in 70 AD, the Roman Empire, as prophesied by Yeshua. Let's read Daniel 11:31. An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall, 1, pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall, 2, take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall, 3, place the abomination that maketh desolate, idols. Let's review the historical record and show that each of these three portions of Daniel's prophecy took place during Jerusalem's destruction in 70 AD. Pollution of the sanctuary, the first part of Daniel's prophecy. The pollution of the sanctuary. Sadly, the evil Hebrew leaders were responsible for polluting the sanctuary even before the Roman army entered the temple. They polluted the sanctuary with the dead bodies of their fellow Hebrew brothers that they themselves murdered in the sanctuary. The pollution of the sanctuary. Even before the Romans entered the temple, the Israelites polluted it first. Now, this historical account is taken from The War of the Jews by Flavius Josephus, Book 6, Chapter 2. In this section, Titus, the Roman general, reprimanded the Hebrew evil leaders for their disregard and pollution of the sanctuary. Section 4. Now Titus was deeply affected and reproached John by his party, and said to them, Have you not, or have not you, vile wretches, by our, the Romans, permission, before your sanctuary been allowed to put up pillars, no foreigner beyond? Have not we, the Romans, given you a leave to even kill such as go beyond it, though he were a Roman? Why do you trample upon dead bodies in this temple? And why do you pollute this holy house with the blood of both foreigners and Jews themselves? I do not force you to defile this, your sanctuary. I will endeavor to preserve you, your holy house, whether you will or not. Section 5. But when Titus saw that these men were neither to be moved nor had any concern to have the holy house spared, he proceeded unwillingly to go on again with the war against them. The Wars of the Jews, Flavius Josephus, Book 5, Chapter 1, Section 1. Jerusalem, Jews, parted into 3 factions, and that one faction fought against the other. A great many of the zealots, these seized upon the inner court of the temple, and the temple was defiled everywhere with murders. These men were mad with all sorts of impiety till the dead bodies of strangers were mingled together with those of their own country, and those profane persons with those of the priests, and the blood of all sorts of dead carcasses stood in lakes in the holy courts themselves. Pollution of the sanctuary continued. Josephus, Wars of the Jews, Book 5, Chapter 1, Section 5. The city was engaged in a war on all sides. From these treacherous crowds of wicked men, the people of the city between them were like a great body torn in pieces. The aged men and women were in such distress by the internal calamities that they wished for the Romans. The citizens themselves were under fear, nor could flee away, for the guards were set at all places to kill those who were innocent. Fighting was incessant both day and night, nor was there any care taken of burial for those that were dead. They trod upon the dead bodies as they lay heaped one upon another, and omitted no method of torment or barbarity. The second part of Daniel's prophecy, shown in historical record. We've dealt with number 1, now we'll move to number 2. To take away the daily sacrifice. Sadly, the evil Hebrew leaders were also responsible for stopping the daily sacrifice. With their constant murders of the temple priests and others, they ran out of persons to actually offer the sacrifices. Wars of the Jews by Flavius Josephus, Book 6, Chapter 2, Section 1. And now Titus had been informed that the sacrifice, called the daily sacrifice, had failed, and had not been offered to Yah, and for want of men to offer it, and that the people were grievously troubled at it. Upon this, Josephus earnestly prayed them to spare their own city, and to prevent that fire which was just ready to seize upon the temple, and to offer their usual sacrifices to God therein. But the tyrant, John, himself cast many reproaches. In Josephus's plea to them, he stated, "And are not both the city and the entire temple now full of dead bodies of your countrymen? It is God himself who is bringing on this fire to purge that city and the temple by means of the Romans, and is going to pluck up this city which is full of your pollutions." Section 2. As Josephus spoke these words with groans and tears in his eyes, his voice was intercepted by sobs. The third part of Daniel's prophecy. The placing of the abomination that makes desolate, or the idols, in the historical record. After the Romans breached the temple and entered, they set up their idols and offered up sacrifices to their idols, the abomination that makes desolate. See the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not. The Wars of the Jews, Miss Flavius Josephus, Book 6, Chapter 6, Section 1. And now the Romans, upon the flight of the seditious into the city, and upon the burning of the holy house itself, and all of the buildings round about it, brought their ensigns, or their idols, to the temple, and set them over against its eastern gate. Ezekiel also prophesies regarding this. Ezekiel 7, verse 2 and 21. Also, you son of man, thus saith Yahweh Elohim unto the land of Israel, and I will give it into the hands of the strangers for a prey, and to the wicked of the earth for a spoil, and they shall pollute it. The Wars of the Jews, Josephus, Book 6, Chapter 8. Verse Section 5. So the Romans, being now become masters of the walls, they placed their ensigns or idols upon the towers, and made joyful acclamations for the victory. All three parts of Daniel's prophecy were fulfilled in that time frame, 70 AD. It was the Most High God Yah that judged Jerusalem, the judgment of Jerusalem. The Wars of the Jews by Flavius Josephus, Book 5, Chapter 1, Section 3. And now, O most wretched city, for you could be no longer a place fit for God, nor could you long continue in being, after you had been a sepulchre for the bodies of thine own people, and has made the holy house itself a burying place in this civil war of thine. Yet mayest you again grow better, if perchance you will hereafter appease the anger of that Yah is the author of thy destruction. Continued quotes of the judgment of Jerusalem. Wars of the Jews by Flavius Josephus, Book 6, Chapter 9, Section 1. Now when Titus, the Roman general, was come, he admired, he expressed, he stated, "We have certainly had God for our assistant in this war, for it was no other than God who ejected the Jews out of these fortifications. For what could the hands of men or any machines do towards overthrowing these towers?" Antiquities of the Jews by Flavius Josephus, Book 20, Chapter 8, Section 4. And this seemed to me to have been the reason why God, out of his hatred of these men's wickedness, rejected our city. And as for the temple, he no longer esteemed it sufficiently pure for him to inhabit therein. But he brought the Romans upon us, and threw a fire upon the city to purge it, and brought upon us our wives and children slavery, as desirous to make us wiser by our calamities. The Abomination of Desolation is not an end times prophecy. The Catholic theory of the Abomination of Desolation happening in the end times is connected to the current day Third Temple building as well as the red heifer sacrificing. This is scripturally wrong and prophetically misleading. We should not look for a temple being built or an abomination being placed in it to determine his coming. Yeshua told us the exact signs to look for in his returning in Matthew 24, 27 to 31. Matthew 24 and 27 states, "For as the lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even into the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." The Abomination of Desolation has happened already as judgment to the generation that crucified Yeshua in 70 AD. Revelations 3 and 3. "Remember therefore how you have received and heard, and hold fast and repent. If therefore you shall not watch, I, Yeshua, will come on thee as a thief." Matthew 24 and 42. "Watch therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord does come." Praise Yah.